Hey there, it's me Eden. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to my channel and visit my Patreon page for early access, link in the description. Lawrence came across to me and delicately put his leg in, before sort of hurdling the edge of the dress to get fully into the dress. He bent down and pulled the shoulders up, while I helped the skirt bit up his legs. "It's not so tight as that one, is it?" he observed. "No," I agreed. "And not so pink." We managed to get it more or less in the right place, and then started on the crossover bits, pulling these over his bra and onto his shoulders. It didn't look quite right to me, but I couldn't see why. Maybe it would look better when I'd sorted it out at the back. "Turn around," I told him, and he did so, his long blonde hair whipping around and hitting me in the face. I looked at the tie-back thing and decided it might be better to do the zip first. It went up quite easily. "Oh, this is much more comfortable," he declared. "I can breathe in this." I found it hard enough to breathe in a bra. I confided. "I know what you mean. It sort of grabs your ribs, doesn't it?" I held the two ends of the tie back in my hand, wondering what to do. "Do you remember how this bit went?" "Not really, it was just a sort of knot, I think." I tried tying the two bits together, but the material was so slippy that it kept coming apart as soon as I let go. "I think you're right," I conceded eventually. "We need Maxine's help now. Shall I call her in?" "If you want." I went over to the door and found myself surprised by the way this new dress moved against me. It was basically a layer of pale pink net hanging over the top of a similarly colored sheath, with the frothy top bit holding it all together. I opened the door, and true to her word, Maxine was standing in the hallway. "Oh my, you look nice," she declared as she saw me. "Do you need some help?" "Yes," I said. "We can't get my zip done up, and Lawrence's dress looks a bit funny, I'm not sure why." She smiled knowingly at me. "Well, let's see what I can do." She came in and looked at Lawrence. "Well, let's get the tie back done up first," she said. Lawrence obediently turned around at her approach, and she did it up in seconds, even putting the rows in place. "Turn around then," she commanded. Lawrence did so, and she looked at him critically. "It's a bit big for you, I think," she concluded eventually. "Not a lot, but it doesn't hug you quite right." Lawrence looked at her pleadingly. "But I like it more than the other one. It feels more comfortable." "That's because it's baggy," Maxine declared. "Maybe if we padded your boobs out a bit more," she said to herself, wandering over to one of her drawers. She found a couple of pairs of plain cotton knickers, and going back to Lawrence, thrust one in each of his bra cups. She stood back to view the effect. "Well, it's better," she decided eventually, "not perfect, but better. You must just be a bit more slender than Sarah here. Speaking of which, what do we need to do for you?" "My zip's stuck," I explained. "Let me see." I turned my back to her, and, lifting the hair dropping down from my wig, she examined the problem. "You've managed to catch some of the material in it. Let's see if we can free it up. I'll have to be careful though, this stuff tears really easily." With firm but controlled movements, Maxine tugged at the dress and the zip for several moments. At last she managed to do what she needed, and to my surprise pulled the zip down rather than up. "Right, no, let's do it properly," she declared, and in a smooth single movement, holding the material together across my shoulder blades, she got the zip up. "There," she declared in triumph. "That should do. Shall we go downstairs then, and show you both off?" We got to the top of the stairs, and Maxine stood aside for Lawrence to go first. "Remember to hold your dress up, otherwise you'll trip over," she warned. Lawrence grabbed hold of some of the peach satin, and I prepared to do the same with my pink dress. It was a lot harder, because the dress was that much tighter. In the end, I simply pulled the whole thing up 4 or 5 inches, and hoped that would do. As we walked downstairs, I found myself advancing only one step at a time. The dress was really unforgiving of rapid or exaggerated movement. Lawrence and Maxine waited patiently at the bottom of the stairs for me. Very ladylike, Maxine observed, smiling at me. I stuck my tongue out at her as I reached the last stair. All right, she asked. Shall we go in? Lawrence and I nodded, and Maxine led us back into the lounge. Mrs. Simmons and Mrs. Luce were still on the sofa chatting. From the doorway I couldn't see any of the others. They looked up as we came in. Oh, that's very nice too, enthused Nikki's mum. Lawrence's mum looked at him critically. That's a bit too big for you, you'd best have the other one. But Mum, this one's much more comfortable, he protested. Anita, Nikki and Tanya came into view from the dinning end of the room and looked us both over. You look good in pink, Anita told me. Yes, but it looked better on Lawrence with his blonde hair, Nikki suggested. I know what you mean. Baby pink goes with blonde hair a bit better, Anita agreed. Why isn't it fitting him properly? Tanya asked, walking around Lawrence and noticing, as we all had, that the dress was actually a bit big for him. He's a bit more delicately built than Steve, Maxine explained. I've given him bigger boobs, but it's still too big. I can't believe it, said Tanya. It's bad enough that Steve is thinner than me, now Lawrence is as well. There was silence for a while. Tanya's weight was obviously both a recurring and sensitive issue in this house. Well, as far as I can see, we'd be better off with Lawrence in the pink dress and Sarah in the peach, Mrs. Simmons suggested. I wondered why she had called Lawrence by his real name, and me by the one Anita had given me. Then I remembered that nobody had ever told her my boy name as far as I knew. I agree, put in Nikki. I sorted that dress out for him first off, and I knew it would suit him. The rest were silent for a while. Eventually Mrs. Luce gave her opinion. Well, I think you'll have to have the pink one, Lawrence. That one's too big for you. Lawrence scowled at her. Well, I think you look better in the pink one anyway, Maxine said to my fellow sufferer. It's a better fit, but the color looks better on you as well. Well, I want him to have the bridesmaid's dress, Tanya said bitterly. It's a bit more elegant. Yes, dear, but it doesn't fit him, her mother pointed out. She was always the same with our Barbie dolls, Nikki said. Hers always had to have the costumes that I'd sorted out for mine. Tanya stared at Nikki with daggers in her eyes. Well, I still think Sarah looked best in the one in the shop, Anita said, considering the point. But if it's just a choice between these two, I prefer him in the peach one. I mean, this pink one's adorable, but somehow he doesn't carry it off as well as Lawrence. There was silence for a while. Well, that's 5 votes to 1. Nikki announced, looking at Tanya. Looks like they swap back. You haven't asked us yet, I protested. They all looked at me in varying degrees of shock. No, we haven't, Maxine agreed. What do you think then? I was stuck for anything to say, but Lawrence was less reticent. I prefer this one, he said firmly. It's more comfortable, and it's not pink. Well, there's silly reasons to like it, his mother muttered. What about you, Steve? Maxine asked me. I was still silent for a moment. Well, I don't really mind, I said eventually. I'll have this one if Lawrence really doesn't want to wear it. That's still 5 votes to 3. Nikki declared. So they swap back. Lawrence's bottom lip started protruding, as indeed did Tanya's. I think that's for the best, Mrs. Simmons said in a conciliatory manner. I'm sorry, Tanya, but that dress really doesn't fit. All right, you've made your point, she replied. So we'll have Lucy in pink and Sarah in peach. That'll do, I suppose. Shall we get them to swap back then? Asked Maxine. No, replied Tanya quickly. We've got to sort out Lucy's school uniform next. But they need some practice in them, Anita pointed out. Maybe you should put the peach one back on for a while, she said to me. Oh, that's all right, Jane Lou said brightly. We've arranged for a practice session on Tuesday. We're going to the theater, and you and Sarah must come along as well. Lawrence had mentioned the theater trip, but I hadn't realized that I was supposed to go as well. I won't be able to come, Anita said to my surprise. I've already agreed to go out with John that night. I stared at her in disbelief and dismay. But you'll go, won't you? She said eagerly to me. You wanted to spend as much time in a skirt or dress as you could. This is a perfect way to do that Tuesday night. Of course he'll come, Nikki answered for me. You can come home from school with me and get changed here. Good idea, exclaimed Anita, before I could get a word in. Then it's all settled, beamed Mrs. Luce. It'll be a nice night out as well as good practice for the new girls. I was mortified. Not only was I now lined up for another evening dressed as a girl, but also I'd be doing it while Anita canoodled away with the Neanderthal John. Well, I might as well get changed back into my other stuff, I said petulantly, forgetting for a moment that that was a mini skirt and fluffy sweater. I'll give you a hand, Anita said, blind to my anger. I don't need one, I responded curtly. I think you will, to get that dress off. Come on, can we use your room again, Maxine? Maxine agreed, and I stomped off up the stairs, pulling the dress up as I did so. I swept into the room, and stood there with my arms folded in front of me, before noticing that Anita had not immediately followed. My anger had subsided a bit when she came upstairs and into the room a few moments later. You forgot your stuff, she announced, casting the clothes I had had on earlier onto Maxine's bed. Are you all right? You seem a bit upset about something. I'm fine, I replied. Just get me out of this dress and I'll be fine. Not until you tell me what the matter is. I turned to look at her. I'm fine, I replied weakly. No, you're not, and you're not getting out of that dress until you tell me why. I breathed deeply, and looked away. How could I stand there, in a baby pink frothy dress, and tell her that I really fancied her, and didn't want her to go out with John on Tuesday? It's nothing, I mumbled. Poor Steve, it's all a bit much for you really, isn't it? And we haven't talked about this yet either. She leaned forward, and kissed me fully on the mouth. We need to do that, and soon, she continued. Come on, let's get your dress off then. I turned my back to her, and she expertly undid the zip and button, easing the frothy top over my arms, and pulling the dress down for me. Thanks, I managed to say. No problem. I undid the suspenders, and let my stockings fall down, taking them off as I stepped out of the belt. Anita stood there in silence watching me. Searching through the pile of clothes I had brought up, I found my tights and sat down on the bed to put them on. Anita, I said, with my heart in my mouth. All this kissing, do you fancy me then? She blushed and looked away. I could have kicked myself for saying that and forcing the issue. Yes, she replied eventually, but it's much more complicated than that. There's John for a start. Yes, John, I butted in bitterly. Yes, John, she repeated with a note of admonition. I'm going out with him, you know. I know, I agreed flatly. And there's all this stuff with the contest as well. Honestly, Steve, it's really complicated. We need a bit of space to talk about it. Let's do it when we get back to my place, okay? She looked at me pleadingly. I hesitated, then nodded. Good. I'm sure we can work something out. I continued to dress, and only had the skirt and boots to put on when there was a knock on the bedroom door. It was Nikki. She put her head around the door but didn't come in. "Sorry to butt in," she said. "There's someone at the door for you, Anita." "It's John." The alarm must have shown on my face, and both Nikki and Anita looked concerned for him. "My mum must have told him I was here," she said. "Blast, I don't really want to see him just now." "Well, I can't just leave him on the doorstep," Nikki responded. "No, of course not. I'll come down and speak to him." "I won't be long, Steve." With that, she was gone. Nikki looked concerned at the door for a few moments, shrugged her shoulders, and then went down again. Forlornly, I put on the denim mini skirt and boots, and sat down on the bed. There was no way I was going to go downstairs then, and see Anita and the monster John talking to each other in the doorway. Please subscribe my channel for the next part. And visit my Patreon page for early access.